America targeted Iran's defense systems first, because without them, everything else Iran was protecting was exposed. Tuesday, 1:03 a.m., southern Iran, Bandar Abbas Air Defense Sector. The AN/ALQ-249 next-generation jammer pod carried by an A-18G Growler operating 180 kilometers to the southwest began transmitting against the S-300 PMU-2 radar frequency that American electronic intelligence had been collecting on for 18 months. The jamming wasn't designed to destroy the radar. It was designed to make the radar's operators uncertain about what they were seeing, to inject ghost tracks into the display, to widen the noise floor on the processor, to reduce the system's ability to distinguish real contacts from electronic artifacts at exactly the moment when real contacts were inbound. The Growler crew had been briefed on the specific radar parameters of the Bandar Abbas S-300 battery for 6 weeks. The AN/ALQ-249's transmission profile had been shaped against those parameters. The jamming began 41 seconds before the first AGM-88G AARGM-ER anti-radiation missile crossed the radar horizon on an approach that the S-300 operators were now looking at through a cluttered, uncertain display. The AARGM-ER, homed on the radar's residual emissions, followed them to 800 meters and impacted at 1:04 a.m. The Bandar Abbas S-300 fire control radar was destroyed before it had fired a single interceptor. The targeting of Iranian air defense systems was not the beginning of the night's operation. It was the precondition for the night's operation. The 11 separate target sets that American aircraft and missiles would strike in the following 3 hours and 12 minutes could be reached only through Iranian airspace that was defended by a layered air defense architecture that had been built, expanded, and upgraded across 4 decades of sanctions-driven improvisation, Russian and Chinese technology transfer, and indigenous development that had produced systems American planners respected and had been planning against for years. The S-300 PMU-2 batteries at Bandar Abbas, Isfahan, and Shiraz represented the long-range tier of that architecture, capable of engaging targets at ranges up to 200 kilometers at altitudes from 10 meters to 27 kilometers. Operated by crews that had trained on the system for years and had been running exercises specifically oriented toward defeating American electronic warfare techniques. The medium-range tier was the indigenous Bavar 373 and the Chinese-supplied HQ-9, each covering a different altitude band and geographic sector. The short-range tier was the RAD and TOR-M1 systems, protecting specific high-value facilities. Taking down the architecture required a sequence. The sequence had been planned and rehearsed for 9 months. The CAD campaign, suppression of enemy air defenses, ran in 4 waves across the first 71 minutes of the operation. Wave 1 was electronic warfare. The A-18G Growlers, establishing jamming coverage against the long-range radar frequencies simultaneously across 3 sectors, beginning 41 seconds before the first kinetic weapons arrived. The 41-second window had been chosen because it was long enough to degrade the S-300 operators' confidence in their display before the first AARGM-ER arrived, and short enough that the timing would not give the operators sufficient warning to go to a backup operating mode that the jamming profile hadn't been shaped against. Wave 2 was the AARGM-ER strikes against the long-range fire control radars. 7 radar installations at 5 sites, each targeted with 1 or 2 missiles, depending on the installation's assessed redundancy. 5 confirmed destroyed in Wave 2. 2 surviving radars immediately detected by signals intelligence, indicating they had shifted to a secondary operating frequency. Those 2 received additional AARGM-ER missiles in Wave 3, which ran 8 minutes after Wave 2, while the surviving radar operators were still assessing their damage and adjusting their picture. Both destroyed. Subscribe to my channel and hit the bell. Every target in this operation, every seed wave, every tactical adaptation, broken down at the level the news coverage can't reach. This is what we do here. Wave 3 also addressed the medium-range Bavar 373 batteries using a different method than the AARGM-ER approach. The Bavar 373 fire control radar operates in a frequency band that the AARGM-ER's seeker is optimized to home against, but the battery's operators had been observed in pre-operation surveillance exercises using extended emissions control, keeping the radar in standby mode, not transmitting until a target required an active engagement. An anti-radiation missile cannot home on a radar that isn't transmitting. The targeting solution for the BAVAR 373 batteries used pre-surveyed GPS coordinates derived from months of collection that had precisely located the battery positions when they were transmitting. JSOW glide bombs from F-18F aircraft hit the BAVAR 373 launchers and associated equipment at their surveyed coordinates, while the radars were in emissions control, destroying the hardware before the radar operators could bring it online to generate the targeting data for an engagement. The emissions control protocol that had been designed to protect the system from anti-radiation missiles was circumvented by a targeting approach that didn't require the radar to be transmitting. What's your call? Type A if the decision to use GPS coordinate strikes against the non-transmitting BAVAR 373 batteries was the tactically decisive adaptation in the SEAD campaign. Type B if the Growler jamming that degraded the S-300 operators' display confidence was the more consequential element of the sequence. Drop your answer below. Wave 4 addressed the short-range TOR M1 batteries protecting the primary target facilities and the ZU-23-2 anti-aircraft gun positions that formed the innermost defensive ring around the highest value installations. These were engaged by B-2 Spirit stealth bombers that had entered Iranian airspace from the northwest at 40,000 feet, while the CD campaign was clearing the medium and long-range threats below them. The B-2's low observable characteristics were the operational reason it was used for Wave 4, rather than the FA-18 packages that had conducted Waves 2 and 3. The TOR M1's engagement envelope extended to altitudes and ranges that would have placed FA-18F aircraft inside the engagement zone, while the B-2 operating at 40,000 feet was above the TOR M1's maximum engagement altitude. The B-2 crews dropped GBU-31 JASSM bombs from outside the TOR M1's effective engagement range against each battery position, destroying the launch vehicles and their associated radar hardware. By 2:14 a.m., 71 minutes after the first Growler began jamming, the Iranian air defense architecture over the primary target areas had been reduced from a layered multi-tier system to a degraded network with destroyed long-range radars, destroyed BAVAR 373 launchers, and destroyed TOR M1 batteries. The coverage gaps created by those destructions were not theoretical. They were specific geographic corridors through which the strike packages targeting the 11 primary facilities could now operate without the threat profile that had existed at 1:02 a.m. The 11 primary target sets struck in the 3 hours and 12 minutes following the SEAD campaign addressed the Iranian military capabilities that had been assessed as most operationally urgent across the 3 analytical categories that had driven the strike authorization. First, the ballistic missile launch infrastructure, whose inventory and launcher positioning had been assessed as the primary offensive threat to American forces and partners in the region. Second, the UAV production and forward staging network that had been executing drone attacks on American positions across a 7-base simultaneous operation 12 days earlier. Third, the naval mining and fast attack coordination infrastructure in the Strait of Hormuz approaches that had been assessed as the most likely instrument of economic escalation if the conflict continued to develop. The ballistic missile target set included 6 launcher deployment areas in Khuzestan, Fars, and Hormozgan provinces, where mobile Fateh 314 and Zolfaghar launchers had been tracked by ISR collection to pre-surveyed launch positions. Mobile launchers are the hardest targeting problem in any air campaign because their value is entirely dependent on their current location rather than their surveyed position, and a launcher that has completed its post-launch displacement to a covered position cannot be destroyed with ordnance that arrives at the surveyed firing point. The targeting approach for the mobile launcher set combined pre-surveyed firing position strikes with ISR-directed real-time engagement. 2 B-1B Lancer bombers held in orbits over international airspace while the CAD campaign ran, each carrying 24 GBU-31 JASSMs, ready to receive real-time targeting updates from the Global Hawk UAV orbiting at 60,000 feet above the target areas. When 4 of the 6 launcher groups had not yet completed their post-launch displacement at the time the strike authority window opened, the Global Hawk feeds directed the B-1B crews to current positions rather than surveyed positions. 4 launcher groups destroyed in their post-displacement positions. 2 had completed displacement into tunnel complexes before the authority window opened. targeted with AARGM-144 JSOW extended-range glide bombs at the tunnel entrance structures, collapsing the entrances and denying egress without destroying the launchers inside. An outcome assessed as operationally equivalent to destruction for the duration of the current conflict phase. The UAV target set built on the production and staging infrastructure that an earlier strike package had addressed 12 days earlier, striking the facilities that had been assessed as beginning their rebuild process, and the additional sites whose locations had been confirmed by collection conducted in the aftermath of the first strikes. Iranian engineers had begun rebuilding UAV storage capacity at 2 of the 3 previously struck Isfahan province facilities within 9 days of the first strikes, a rebuild tempo that American collection had tracked and that the targeting team had incorporated into the second strike package with updated imagery showing the specific reconstruction work underway. Striking partially rebuilt facilities at 9 days was operationally different from striking them at 6 months. At 9 days, the replacement equipment hadn't arrived. The rebuild was structure and preparation without capability. Destroying the structure at 9 days reset the rebuild clock to 0 and sent a message about the timescale on which rebuilding would be permitted to proceed before the next strike arrived. The message was not subtle. It was communicated through 2 GBU-31s per facility arriving at 2:28 a.m., and it would be received by every engineer who had been working the rebuild when the imagery showed the results the following morning. The naval mining infrastructure target set addressed a capability that the conflict's maritime dimension had elevated to operational priority. Iranian naval mining doctrine used the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps Navy's fast attack boat fleet and the regular Iranian Navy's mine warfare vessels to deploy mines in the Strait of Hormuz approaches and the Northern Gulf during conflict escalation, creating a barrier that could restrict commercial shipping traffic and impose economic costs on the United States and its partners that were disproportionate to Iran's investment in the mining operation. The mining infrastructure, pre-positioned mine stocks at Keshm Island and Bandar Abbas, the mine warfare vessels at their pier positions, the IRGCN boat staging facilities that supported the fast attack deployment component of the mining doctrine, was addressed in the strike package with JASSM-ER cruise missiles that had been allocated from B-52H bombers operating over the Arabian Sea. 14 JASSM-ER missiles targeting 7 sites across a 180-kilometer coastal stretch. The simultaneous time on target window was 90 seconds, designed to prevent personnel and equipment at unsecured sites from being evacuated after the first impacts were detected. 12 of 14 impacts confirmed by battle damage assessment. 2 mine warfare vessels at Bandar Abbas that had been moved from their pier positions to an anchorage 2 kilometers offshore before the strikes arrived were assessed as damaged by near-miss blast effects, but not destroyed. Both were tracked by maritime ISR moving back toward Bandar Abbas at reduced speed following the strikes. The Iranian air defense response to the strike operation was constrained to the surviving systems. The 2 Tor-M1 batteries at facilities that the B-2 wave had not reached because they were in sectors where the CAD campaign had determined their engagement of the strike aircraft was unlikely given the approach routes chosen and the manpads teams positioned at specific facilities. The surviving Tor-M1 batteries attempted engagements against B-2 aircraft passing through their sectors during the primary strikes. Neither engagement produced a missile launch. The Tor-M1's missile crews held fire in both cases after their radar operators assessed the target's flight parameters as potentially outside the reliable kill probability envelope. The manpads teams at 3 facilities fired at low-altitude aircraft during the strike sequence and produced no hits. A single SA-7 Grail shoulder-fired missile was fired at an F-A-18F during its egress from the Khuzestan target area and missed by approximately 40 meters, close enough to be reported in the pilot's post-mission debrief as a confirmed manpads engagement and to produce the after-action recommendation for additional flare expenditure during low-altitude egress over targets not fully cleared by the SEAD campaign. 0 American aircraft were lost. The strike campaign that had destroyed 11 target sets across 3 capability categories conducted a 4-wave SEAD campaign against a multi-tier Iranian air defense architecture and involved over 60 aircraft and 40 cruise missiles in a 3-hour, 53-minute operation from first Growler transmission to last impact, had put every aircraft back on the ground before dawn without a single combat loss. The SEAD campaign's effectiveness was the operationally decisive factor. An Iranian air defense network with its long-range radars functioning, its Bavar 373 batteries operational, and its Tor M1 batteries covering the approach corridors would have presented a threat environment that the strike packages couldn't have navigated at the loss rates that American commanders would have accepted. The SEAD campaign didn't just enable the strikes on the primary targets, it determined whether those strikes were possible at all. What would you do as the Iranian air defense commander who has just watched a 4-wave suppression campaign destroy your S-300 radars, Bavar 373 launchers, and Tor M1 batteries in 71 minutes? And you know the primary strikes are already running? Comment your response and your remaining options below. The battle damage assessment, completed 18 hours after the operation, addressed each target category against the pre-strike objectives. Ballistic missile launcher infrastructure. 4 groups destroyed at post-displacement positions. 2 denied egress into tunnel complexes, assessed as 6-month degradation of mobile launcher operational capacity in the 3 provinces targeted. UAV production and staging. 4 facilities destroyed, including 2 in active rebuild from the previous strike. Estimated 8-month reset to pre-first strike inventory levels, assuming maximum rebuild tempo under available materials and workforce. Naval mining infrastructure. 12 of 14 sites destroyed. 2 mine warfare vessels damaged with unknown operational status, assessed as 12-week degradation of mining operational capacity, requiring vessel repair and mine stock replacement before doctrine-standard mining operations could be conducted. Iranian air defense architecture. All long-range fire control radars in the 5 targeted sectors destroyed. All Bavar 373 batteries in the targeted sectors destroyed. Tor M1 batteries at primary target facilities destroyed. Surviving air defense capacity. The untargeted sectors in northeastern Iran and the Tehran air defense sector, whose systems had not been engaged because the strike packages hadn't transited those corridors. Iran retained functional strategic air defense in the untargeted sectors. Over the targeted sectors, the degradation was assessed as operationally complete for a minimum of 6 months pending Russian resupply of S-300 components under the existing Defense Cooperation Agreement. Resupply that American intelligence assessed as likely but subject to the logistical and political constraints that had slowed similar Russian resupply transactions in the past. Iran's formal military response arrived in 2 phases over the following 22 hours. The first phase was a ballistic missile launch from the 2 tunnel complexes that the JSOW strikes had denied egress from, but had not penetrated. Iranian engineering crews spent 8 hours clearing sufficient debris from one entrance to extract a single Zolfaghar launcher. It fired 4 Zolfaghar missiles at Al Udeid Air Base at 11:30 p.m. All 4 were engaged by the Thad battery. 3 were destroyed in mid-course. 1 was engaged in terminal phase by Patriot PAC-3 and destroyed at 4,800 meters altitude. No impacts on Al Udeid. The effort was an Iranian demonstration that the strike had not produced complete operational paralysis, not an accident, a communication. Iran was saying the strike had not ended its ability to respond. The communication had been received. The second phase was the Iranian Foreign Ministry statement at 6 a.m., a detailed public accounting of the facilities struck and the capabilities damaged, and a declaration that Iran reserved all options for responding at a time and through means of its own choosing. The specificity was unusual. Iran had historically understated rather than acknowledged strike damage. The decision to enumerate the damage accurately was assessed as a domestic framing choice, describing the damage honestly enough that the public's subsequent experience didn't contradict the official account, while preserving political space for the implied future response. The response was not immediate, and Iran, planning a kinetic response with its primary defended sector's air defense infrastructure destroyed, had to account for what a second American strike package could reach without the defensive constraint that had existed before 1:03 a.m. The planning problem was different without the constraint. The time it took to plan around the difference was the operational effect of the SEAD campaign that outlasted every other element of the night's work. Don't miss the follow-up breakdown of Iran's response timeline and the second American strike decision. Subscribe to my channel and hit that bell. Air defense systems are not primarily offensive weapons. They protect. They protect territory, infrastructure, military capability, and the freedom of action of the force whose assets operate under their umbrella. When the umbrella is destroyed, everything under it is exposed. Not immediately attacked, but exposed to the possibility of attack at a cost the attacking force finds acceptable. The 11 primary target sets that American aircraft struck after the CAD campaign were reachable because the air defense umbrella over them had been removed. The removal was the CAD campaign. The CAD campaign was the operation that enabled the operation. That sequencing, clear the defense, then strike the defended, is the oldest logic in aerial warfare. What changes with technology is the speed, the precision, and the survivability of each phase. What doesn't change is the sequence. And the sequence on Tuesday morning ran exactly as planned. 71 minutes to clear the architecture that had taken 4 decades to build, and then 3 hours and 12 minutes to reach everything the architecture had been protecting. Was the CD campaign's destruction of Iran's air defense architecture the decisive operational achievement of the night, more consequential than the primary strikes on the missile, UAV, and naval targets it enabled? Type S for the SAD was the decisive achievement. Type P for the primary target strikes produced the greater strategic effect. Make your case below. The damage was enumerated in the battle damage assessment completed 18 hours after the operation. The changed operational environment was being calculated in Iranian Air Defense Headquarters, Ballistic Missile Command, and UAV program offices simultaneously. Each organization assessing what remained, estimating the reconstitution timeline, and calculating what operations were possible before that reconstitution was achieved. 8 months for UAV production, 6 months for mobile launcher capacity, 12 weeks for naval mining capacity, 6 months plus Russian resupply for air defense restoration. Each interval was a window. American planners were looking at the same intervals from the other side of the calculation. The windows were what the operation had bought. The question was what happened inside them. If this breakdown delivered the analysis you came here for, like the video, share it, and subscribe to my channel. Every SEAD wave, every primary target, every Iranian response decision, we build it out completely. Which target category from this operation, air defense infrastructure, ballistic missile launchers, UAV production, or naval mining, do you think produced the highest strategic value relative to the cost of the strike? And what does Iran's air defense rebuild look like if Russian resupply is delayed? Drop both answers below.